the omega-3 fatty acids that are DHA and EPA. Those are the most advanced forms of the omega-3s that you cannot get from the plant world. The body very poorly converts those where they need to go. This is one of the problems, or many problems, with a vegan or vegetarian diet. People with the highest levels of omega-3 fatty acids naturally occurring in their blood have the lowest risk of everything: heart attacks, strokes, cancer, dementia, diabetes, dying. Everything is better. AFib, everything is better when you have more omega-3.
This is Dr. Talks.
Welcome back to the Conquering Chronic Inflammation Summit. I'm your host, Dr. David Jockers, and I'm honored to have a great conversation with my friend, Dr. Jack Wolfson, the natural heart doctor today. And we're talking about the relationship between inflammation, heart attacks, strokes, AFib, all different types of cardiovascular issues. If you don't know Dr. Jack, he is a board certified cardiologist. He's a founder of naturalheartdoctor.com, the #1 heart health website. He is a worldwide leader in cardiovascular health and the best-selling author of the book, The Paleo Cardiologist. Again, we're doing a deep dive today on inflammation, how it impacts cardiovascular health. You can check out Dr. Jack at naturalheartdoctor.com, a wealth of information there. You guys are going to enjoy this interview, so let's go right to it. Well, Dr. Jack Wolfson, always great to connect with you. And I know today we're talking about inflammation and how that impacts our cardiovascular health. So let's dive into it.
Thanks so much for having me on. Inflammation, pretty much every cardiologist, every medical doctor knows inflammation is bad, but their answer to inflammation is going to be this band-aid pharmaceutical attempt and things like statin drugs and other things to kind of cover up the inflammation that's there, when both you and I know that the answer is really to find the root cause of inflammation. And this other, maybe more complex term called oxidative stress, that combination of inflammation and oxidative stress, it is that common link between the disease itself and the cause. So you've got the cause, you've got the results of inflammation and oxidative stress, and then you've got the disease: heart disease, cancer, dementia, you name it. And I appreciate you having me on to really discuss kind of causation of why people are inflamed.
Yeah, it's so key. I mean, when we think about heart health, there's so many people out there and they're dealing with heart disease, obviously, with high blood pressure, with dyslipidemia, is another big factor. AFib, I know you obviously have seen a lot of that, especially on the rise here lately. Myocarditis, we've heard that term, especially after COVID. We've heard that term a whole lot more, which is basically inflammation of the heart muscle. And so let's talk about root cause factors here that are involved.
Yeah. There's always these things that lead to the inflammation, and that's just a natural body response to these injurious things that are happening to it. And I kind of view everything through this lens of eating well, thinking well, and living well. So this concept of eat well, live well, think well. So if we eat the wrong foods, if we live the wrong lifestyle, even if we think the wrong thoughts, that ultimately leads to inflammation. And I think another thing maybe in between the violations of eat well, live well, think well, and the inflammatory response is how all these things really impact the gut microbiome. So when the gut microbiome is damaged, for example, from the wrong diet or from environmental toxins or things like mold mycotoxins, that the microbiome therefore changes, that leads to intestinal hyperpermeability. Now things get into the body that don't belong. The inflammatory system kicks in along with the immune system, and then excess oxidative stress. And then ultimately, yeah, like you said, atrial fibrillation, myocarditis, high blood pressure, dyslipidemia, and then heart attack, strokes, cancer, dementia, the whole thing. And I think in a lot of ways, it's really exciting times for physicians like you and I, and so many others, to be able to understand this kind of whole cascade of events that happens. And it still is different than how 98% of the medical doctors see it. They're just only trained in that pharmaceutical model, and therefore they never really get to understand root cause medicine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that the idea of inflammation at the underlying as the underlying root cause of all these different cardiovascular diseases is it's getting into the mainstream medical model. However, so most medical doctors, they think about heart disease, high blood pressure, they think, okay, there's inflammation there. But instead of saying, why is the inflammation there? How can we actually get to the root cause? Their training is really just, hey, high blood pressure is give you a medication, right? And not actually addressing the root cause. Why do you think that is? Why do you think these are very intelligent people? Why do you think that they're not diving deeper here?
Well, I think I like to use the analogy, like you said, they are very smart people, so I'm not going to denigrate them for that. But you only know what you know. It's like if you and I went on a trip to, Central Africa and we didn't speak the language of the local people, they could look at us like idiots. And we would say, hey, we're not idiots. We're not, unintelligent. We've just never learned your language. We've never been told your language. So the physicians have never been told the health language. They've never been taught the health language, as crazy as this sounds when you think about all the training that the medical doctors go through. They've never been told the health language, only the sick language. And it's really unfortunate. There's not really much of a sign that any of this is changing, certainly as it relates to the 4-year medical education that people are getting. Now, the doctors of chiropractic, the naturopathic medical doctors, they'll clearly get the different message in their training. But the medical doctors, unfortunately, that's just the way that it is. And it's only because it's controlled by the pharmaceutical industry. We're talking about a $1.5 trillion industry. And when you have that much money at stake, it's not surprising to people to understand that it's really, leads to the wrong approach in conventional medical training. And listen, God bless the men and women who work in emergency rooms and trauma centers. But when it comes to the prevention, treatment, and reversal of chronic diseases, like we said, high blood pressure, dyslipidemias, atrial fibrillation, cancer, diabetes, being overweight, they really have nothing at all. And to circle back finally to the inflammation, yeah, it's really just about finding that root cause. And we look at it through the method of what we call the 100-year heart method of eat well, live well, think well. And then we could use the most advanced testing in the world, evidence-based supplements, biohacking strategies to help people achieve heart health, to recover from cases of myocarditis and all these things. But it really is, David, so many times I see someone who has had a heart attack and they're in the treatment, they're in the recovery phase. They've never had one marker of inflammation even tested
Right.
ever. And it's sad. It's really sad.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you ask the cardiologist, hey, what do you think is at the root of this high blood pressure? They probably rattle off a few things, and one of those things would be inflammation. Yet they're not even testing for it, and they're not even doing anything really to address it. That's the thing. They kind of know, but they just don't really have, they just haven't been taught how to actually get to the root cause, how to actually address it and get to the root cause. And they'd be shocked if you actually showed them the research that, hey, there's an actual relationship between leaky gut and issues in the gut and how that relates to issues in the heart and the blood vessels. And they're like, what? Because they're taught all of these systems are separate. So if you have gut issues, you have if you have gut inflammation, leaky gut, you're going to have digestive symptoms, right? And heart symptoms are separate, totally separate system. And we realize in looking at the body holistically, that breakdown anywhere impacts us, basically systemically throughout the whole body. And in particular, there's this intimate relationship between gut health and cardiovascular health.
Yeah, most certainly. And the data on that is plentiful. And I can't really explain why most cardiologists are not reading that, as you said. And it's right there, it's in the literature. But when you talk about this concept of leaky gut, most cardiologists have never heard of leaky gut. If they've heard of it, they would only have some kind of a condemnation and criticism of that concept. Intestinal hyperpermeability is a thing. It's been written in the medical literature for years. And just as you said, as you get these things that coming through that intestinal barrier that don't belong, now you set up this whole cascade where, yes, eventually it leads to this leaky heart, as I call it, there's leaky vessels. And now you have the inflammation inside the vessels, immune system activation inside the vessels, and you ultimately develop coronary artery disease or atrial fibrillation. And of course, this dysfunctional blood vessels leads to hypertension. And hypertension is really not a disease in and of itself. I mean, there's something that's causing it. It's really just a sign that people are sick, sign that people are inflamed, and those are the things that we look to reverse.
Yeah. What are some of the other big things? We're talking about obviously intestinal hyperpermeability or layman's term, leaky gut. What are some of the other big drivers of inflammation?
Well, I think that, if we look at some of the food, so for example, if we don't eat enough seafood, that drives inflammation because we need healthy amounts of omega-3 fatty acids from eating seafood to keep our immune system and our inflammatory system in check. If we do not eat enough of the free range grass fed meats, again, same thing. We're missing vitamins and minerals. Organic food. If we eat non organic food and the pesticides, boom. The pesticides kill the pests, if you will, which are actually good pests inside of our body, the microbiome. The pesticides kill that. Now you have the leaky gut, like we talked about before. And those are just, some of the food and beverages, artificials, sweeteners, flavorings, colorings. Like, you are, of course, one of the worldwide experts in fasting. When you don't fast, you don't give that microbiome a chance to recover. You don't give the intestinal lining and the barrier a chance to recover. Those things are all critically important, but that's just the food story. And then in addition, what about a lot of the toxic grains that people consume, some of the other foods that they really should not be eating in any appreciable level? But then that's just one part. What about the sleep part of the story where, sleep allows the gut to heal and the microbiome to heal? Same thing with sunshine to the solar panel, which is our skin, to allow it to heal. And then you have this huge category of all these environmental toxins, one of which is pesticides, but another one that I know you're intimately familiar with, and that is mold and mold mycotoxins. So, the most famous mold mycotoxin of all time that most people, everybody has heard of, it's called penicillin. Penicillin is a mycotoxin from mold that kills bacteria. Fleming discovered it 100 years ago, and now it's, most used antibiotic, in the world. It kills bacteria, and including it kills bacteria in your gut. So if you're swallowing all these mold mycotoxins down, destroying your gut microbiome, it leads to leaky gut, of which there are many studies that prove this point. But my point here really is just to say there's a whole litany of things that can ultimately lead to inflammation, oxidative stress, immune dysfunction, all these other things. And then to wrap up this whole concept more, if you're not thinking well, if you are under stress, stress is fight, flight, or freeze. It is not the rest and digest of the parasympathetic nervous system. So the gut microbiome suffers. The leaky gut occurs. Inflammation, oxidative stress, and disease. And it's really just a simplistic model, once you talk about it once or twice, like you and I have, that people can finally understand this is the solution. If I eat well, live well, think well, if I do these things, and we can test for these with the most advanced testing in the world, that, most cardiologists, they're stuck in the 1970s with their basic tests. And then do we use these kind of what we call like this whole biohacking category, which is the evidence-based supplements and then other techniques, the biohacking techniques, and this could be the sauna, red light therapy, cold plunge, whatever, IVs, whatever people choose to do, that would be part of the solution.
Yeah, so basically inflammation is kind of this adaptive response when the body's overloaded with toxicities, infections, deficiencies, chronic stress, like you were talking about. And so when all of this becomes too much for the body to adapt effectively, inflammation in a sense is how the body responds. And so we get this low grade systemic inflammation that to some degree prevents our body from dying immediately from, let's say, a systemic an infection that would get in, kill you quickly, but slowly chews your system up, right? Including, when we think about blood vessels, the endothelial lining of the blood vessels chews that up, creates scar tissue in there, which down the road, causes symptoms like high blood pressure, all the different cardiovascular type symptoms. And ultimately, we obviously gotta get to the root cause and help the body adapt better. So where do you start when somebody comes in and they're dealing with, let's say, high blood pressure, hypertension, they have AFib, where do you start with them?
Well, I think some of the quick wins are going to be really pushing more the foods to eat as opposed to what not to eat. So saying to people, hey, I want you to eat more seafood like wild salmon, sardines, anchovies, clams, oysters, shrimp, lobster, crabs, scallops, wild salmon roe. So try and focus on eating some of these foods. Try and focus on eating some cleaner
What are
products.
what are some of the great nutrients you love? You mentioned seafood several times. What are some of the real powerful nutrients in there that people should be aware of and why they're so beneficial?
Well, number one are the omega-3 fatty acids that are DHA and EPA. Those are the most advanced forms of the omega-3s that you cannot get from the plant world. The body very poorly converts those where they need to go. And this is one of the problems, or many problems, with a vegan or vegetarian diet. So those omega-3 fatty acids, they are very plentiful in every single cell membrane, the fence that encompasses or encloses the cell, keeps things inside the cell that belong, keeps things outside the cell that don't belong. And this is the omega-3 fatty acids of which is loaded. Now, another thing that's in the membrane, the cell membrane, is cholesterol, which proves the importance of cholesterol, lest anybody be uncertain about how valuable cholesterol is. So those omega-3 fatty acids, that is one thing that is in seafood. Again, people with the highest levels of omega-3 fatty acids naturally occurring in their blood have the lowest risk of everything. Heart attacks, strokes, cancer, dementia, diabetes, dying, everything is better. AFib, everything is better when you have more omega-3s. So we have people really push that. Now, seafood also, of course, all the vitamins and minerals that a fish would need, humans need that as well. Same thing again with the shellfish, things like zinc, selenium, copper, all the full spectrum of all the vitamins that's right there in the seafood. So it really is just a complete superfood. If you think about a salmon roe, an egg, it contains all the nutrients that a salmon needs to come to life. You can't find that in the plant world. There's no oatmeal or almonds or soybeans that can have any kind of comparison. Once
Salmon
again,
are one of the most amazing species, one of the strongest species of animals because they can swim upstream against rapids. I mean, you think about the amount of mitochondrial energy production they got to have to swim against the current, and they can literally jump out of the water 10, 12 feet. I mean, it's just incredible energy production. You got the omega-3s, you got astaxanthin as well in the wild caught salmon, one of the most powerful antioxidants. So like we think about like strong animals, right? Like a bison, right? That, if we're going to be a consume bison, that's going to help improve our mitochondrial energy production because these are just really strong, lean, healthy animals. Well, wild caught salmon, I mean, swimming against the stream, jumping out of the water like that, we're going to confer a lot of those benefits that give it that incredible strength and resilience.
there was a TV show, there is a TV show, it's called Alone, and it features people who go off into the wilderness and try and survive, and it's a competition to see who can last the longest. So there was a woman who was very adept at living outside and building shelter, and she was put on a location that was close to this certain river, and she was basically able to go in there and pluck out the salmon. So she had the shelter and she had the salmon and nothing else. And she quit the show after like a month and a half in perfect health. And she said, you know
Wow.
what? It's time to go home. And she won the show easily. So all she is doing on living on one food, one food, which is this complete superfood. So, again, I think that is perfect to combat things. So if all people got out of listening to you and I in this one particular conversation is to eat more seafood, they will gain benefit. I want to tell you one more thing too,
Yeah.
is that we have tested wild salmon roe
Yeah.
for various things, including metals, and it's very low on all things you would consider dangerous. But one thing that I would consider very dangerous, especially in light of a recent study that came out regarding plastic. So let me say this about the plastic study that was reported in New England Journal of Medicine. New England Journal of Medicine, they look at people who are undergoing a procedure called a carotid endarterectomy. So they remove the plaque in the arteries that supply the brain. They studied that under a microscope and in a laboratory, and they divided it into two groups. One group, which represented two-thirds of the people, had evidence of micro and nanoplastics visibly
Wow.
in the plaque. The plastic was in the plaque. Surprisingly, one-third of the group had no evidence of plastic. You would think most people have evidence of it, but one-third of the group did not. Here's the deal. They followed them for 3 years. The group with the plastic had 3 times the rate of heart attack, stroke, and dying in a 3-year period. 3 times. That it makes it a bigger risk factor than high blood pressure, diabetes, smoking, obesity combined. Combined. So back to the salmon. So we tested the wild salmon roe. It contained zero plastic in there. So when people talk about microplastics and nanoplastics, it's out there and you get it from a lot of different places. And that ultimately damages the body, leading to inflammation, oxidative stress, and disease, all the things we've talked about. But it's not coming from these healthy seafoods. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, I would say, the number one source there is gonna be all the plastics we're using, especially with hot beverages, right? Like, I just did a Instagram reel on my wife and I, we went to a coffee shop to get coffee, and I was showing people, I'm like, "I never drink co if I get coffee at a store, I never drink it with the lid on, right? Take that lid off because that's like you're just basically mega dosing microplastics into your system if you're drinking a hot beverage through a plastic top."
Yeah, I think it's always best. And what I do is I drink out of the metal container. So I'm a kind of
That's
guy
right.
who walks into it, and with own, my own Yeti container. And I am a big coffee drinker. So I drink, of course, organic and mold mycotoxin free coffee. And there's actually some organic instant coffees, but that is a major offender. You're right. The plastic, that's there, the plastic in the cup itself, all of if you go to a grocery store, maybe they're selling some kind of a salsa that is going to have all this high, citric acid levels and stuff like that are just eating away at
Yeah.
the plastic container that it comes in. Plastic, I mean, you and I are talking right now, and if we take a breath in, there's probably some nanoplastic that, again, is just not probably, it is. So I really think it's twofold, right? It's about how do we decrease the exposure,
Yeah.
and then how do we improve our detoxification systems to avoid the consequences of it?
Yeah, absolutely. And so how should people go about improving their detoxification systems? That's so critical.
Well, as you know, there's just so many different strategies that people can use. Give the body what it needs, take away what it doesn't. So for detoxification, I think that there's a lot of good evidence these days of people using the binders. I don't know about you, but we're pretty
Yeah.
big fans. Quality Shilajit,
Mhm.
fulvic acid, humic acid. There's some pretty good chlorella spirulina products that probably have
Yeah.
some benefits. But I think the main thing is really just kind of keeping your excretory pathways open. So good hydration status, good cellular hydration status with which you're very familiar with as a mitochondrial expert, where your body is making all that high quality intracellular water, through all the mechanisms that it does. But, stool, urine, and then skin, sauna methodologies. But, another quick win aside from the seafood is really just telling people to get outside, spend
Yeah.
more time outside. The longer we are outside, the more often we're outside, the longer we'll live. It's very simple.
Yeah, for sure. I always say you got to pee and poop your way to good health, and then we can add in you got to breathe and sweat your way as well, right? And then talking about getting outside, there's so many benefits, right? Obviously, the sun plays a big role with vitamin D, but you also have the infrared impact. You talked about that mitochondrial energy, that fourth phase of water, right? Creating kind of that crystalline effect in the system and helping improve cell to cell communication. Infrared exposure is big, like it changes the water systems and the cell communication inside of us. And our ancestors were all getting it because they were out in the sun, they were outside getting infrared exposure all the time. Today we're not. And now fortunately we've got technology where even if you're living in a climate where you're not able to access the sun as much, you can get infrared saunas, you can get infrared. I have an infrared and PEMF that my wife and I will lay on and pray together at night before we go to bed, right? And it helps improve sleep quality, helps with cell to cell communication, drainage, detoxification, so many great little things that we could be doing. But like you said, just getting out in nature is so critical when it comes to overall health.
And it's free, it's free. I mean, getting our solar panel outside in the natural light, preferably in the sun, like our ancestors did. All of our ancestors came from the Middle East. They came from Northeastern Africa. They came from that area, and they were outside all day, every day. All plants and all animals are outside. The skin is the solar panel. The eyeballs are a solar panel. Unfortunately, we moved away from that, unfortunately for our health, and a lot of people, they live in, Buffalo, New York, and my hometown of Chicago, and Seattle, and Portland, and there's a lot of beauty in all those different places, but the reality is that the further we get away from the equator, our health is gonna suffer.
Yeah.
And, you and I both spoke of the truth about cancer years ago, and that's one of the things I said from the stage is that you can't get healthy in the same environment where you got sick. Now, it doesn't mean you have to necessarily move, but the more you change up your environment, and that could be your food environment, your sleep environment, your sunshine environment, the toxins in the home environment, the more you change that up, the better chance you have of getting healthy.
Yeah, that's so key. In Japan, Japan is one of the healthiest countries in the world, but they're also some of the hardest working people. These are people that, it's not uncommon. They're working 60 plus hours a week. It's actually one of the big health risk factors they have. But when they deal with a stressed out businessman, one of the first things they recommend is forest bathing. They actually have facilities where they'll send some of these guys, right? And they just get out, no electronics, and they're just in the forest. And their healthcare system is they're spending fractions compared to what we're spending because they're actually addressing root cause factors, helping improve this person's environment. And they get them out into a healthier external environment, and that improves their internal environment.
Well, I think the Japanese too, as well, is that they have a big, seafood component to their
Yeah, true.
diet. Which I think ultimately, leads to their longevity, and their rates of smoking are much, much, much higher than
Yeah.
it is, in the United States. So I think it's the seafood, really that makes a big difference, for them as well. And certainly the Okinawans, I mean, that's one of the blue zones, that's there. When you talk about forest bathing and stuff like that, we start to lose people. We start to get people to roll their eyes about us being tree huggers and stuff like that. I will tell you this, the first time I hugged a tree, I had a very moving experience again. I basically, like, just welled up tears, cried like a baby. It was a very, very emotional thing for me, and I don't know, I just, again, I was kinda, like, channeling my and thinking about my father, who I lost when he was 63 back in 2007, and, really kind of embracing nature as how God created it, and we've just lost touch with that in just every way. And these are real easy things for anybody to do to reclaim their health. And again, and all that is going to get back to the topic here, which is, yeah, just different strategies to lower inflammation.
Yeah, yeah. And you don't have to be like, I mean, Jack, I'm glad you had such an amazing experience with the tree hugging. But even if you don't believe in that, just going out in nature, I mean, it's been documented that there are healthy electromagnetic frequencies that come from being around nature that all of our ancestors were exposed to that have a calming effect. They stimulate your parasympathetic nervous system and get you out of fight or flight and help create balance in your nervous system, which creates a healing response in your body. And then there are also essential oils that are being released from all of these plants that you are taking in that have antimicrobial effects, that have pro-immunive, like immune balancing effects in your body, that have all these positive effects, anti-inflammatory benefits that support your body. So you don't have to, it's like you don't have to have a profound spiritual experience out there. It's great if you do. I'm all for that. But just go out there and just be in a sense, and you're going to get healthier as you're out there in the woods like that.
Well, I think it's really just the ability to embrace the, nature, how our ancestors did. And like you said, this kind of communication that's existing out there. The communication could be, osmotic, what you're smelling in, different phytochemicals that you may not be able to smell that are being released in that sense that have all those medicinal values to it. Like you said, the electrons from the earth, and really, in a lot of ways, just breathing in the fresh air and the oxygen that are being produced by the plants in this kind of symbiotic effect, with us. And yeah, how does that come back and nourish the gut microbiome as you're breathing in all that in? You may be breathing in obviously a lot of healthy microbes that you will then also be swallowing down. All those things are going to be consistent with improving your health.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what should people do to obviously to help improve sleep? Nature, just being out in nature is going to help with that. What are some of your other top hacks for helping improve sleep?
Well, the most important thing is that, our ancestors went to sleep, with the sun down and shortly thereafter. In the beginning, there was darkness and then there was light. And that essentially that's circadian rhythms, and we should not violate those. It's interesting, David, that there was a recent study that showed that people who consider themselves night owls, people who go to sleep later than those who go to sleep on time shortly after the sundown. Those who go to sleep later, the night owls, they had double the risk of coronary artery calcification. So we need to make sure that we go to sleep on time. Our ancestors went to sleep shortly after the sundown. It's the best strategy for us to stay healthy. I don't make the rules. I'm not the rule maker. That was God. God created the rules and we need to follow those. Those circadian rhythms are very important. And it's nice when science validates that to show people, including the medical doctors, hey, tell your people to go to bed earlier. If you go to sleep at 11, make it 10. If you go to sleep, midnight, make it 11. Make some small little changes. In the Wolfson household, I know in the Jockers household, like, we're not staying up, late at night. We're not sitting up on tech. The Wolfsons go to bed between 8:30 and 9:30 every night. And in the wintertime, it'll be even earlier. We'll go to sleep at 7:30 sometimes. And me personally, because I wake up early naturally, I go to bed early naturally, my body just calls for that. When the sun goes down, I feel it and I smart about it and I wanna go to bed.
Yep. So listen to the sun. Don't try to, and really that's what you got to do is you got to dial in all the lights in your house. So artificial lighting can tell your brain that it's still daytime, even though it's at night. So you got to dim those lights as the sun's setting. And there's a proverb that says if you want to have great energy during the day, watch the sunrise. And if you want to sleep well at night, watch the sun set. That's where these highest rays of infrared, you get red light, so you got a lot of circadian rhythm supportive wavelengths of light that come out during those periods of time. But most people out there they're mal illuminated, meaning that they've got the wrong lights on at the wrong time in a sense, right? And so they're giving information to their brain that it's daytime when it's really nighttime. And for many of them, they have trouble falling asleep even if they try to go to bed early.
Yeah, and we know. I mean, from a nature standpoint, we know that that decimates a lot of nature. It decimates the trees, decimates the birds, and the plants. Again, that we are, leading to this, this light pollution that's causing destructive nature to it. And to your point, the sunrise, sunset, our ancestors used to watch those. I think we are so attracted to those because our bodies understand the health benefits of it. Why do we find sunset and sunrise so beautiful? It's different than looking at a beautiful painting, if you will. It's a different sense of that our body just really is naturally attracted to that. And people have lost that. People live in high-rise buildings, they live in suburbs, they're surrounded by other houses. They've got no opportunity to watch the sunrise, sunset, whereas our ancestors clearly understood that. And so much of, again, in Western, cultures is at least, praying to the east, praying towards Jerusalem. And in doing so, facing that way when you're praying, I think also, I mean, you're doing that, you're getting that sunrise, you're looking as that sun's coming up over the horizon. So I think that there's something to that as well.
Yeah, for sure. Great benefits there. And so let's talk about some of the labs that you like to look at when somebody comes in to see you. What are some key labs that give you an idea what's taking place in somebody's body?
Yeah, I know you feel the same way about this. When people kind of rush to all this stuff about cholesterol and LDLs and HDLs, at this point in my career, I think that those tests are totally worthless. I'm not even interested. I'll order them because people want them and we could talk about them, but I have no interest in them. When it comes to lipids, the main thing I look at is that apolipoprotein B to apolipoprotein A ratio. We look for something which is a genetic marker, LP little a. Quick, side note, I do not believe in bad genetics. I believe our genetics are perfect. We are built, again, perfectly, and our genetics are perfect until we screw them up, if you will. So those markers I look at from a lipid standpoint, but I think the most important thing is really checking for the inflammation and oxidative stress. And you can actually do an oxidative stress urine test in your own home without a doctor's order, get the results, and now what the situation is. Now make changes in your life and then retest 3, 4 months, down the road and see how you did. But the inflammatory markers I like, HSCRP, of course, the most famous, a PLA, a phospholipase A2 is a good marker as well. There are some other markers of inflammation that I don't think are overly necessary. I think if you hit a few of them, you're pretty good. But HSCRP, PLA, and then the markers of oxidative stress. I like oxidized LDLs in the blood. I like looking at MPO in the blood, good data on all those. And then looking at the lipid peroxides in the urine, I think is another good strategy. So, like I said before, it's amazing how some people come in, they've never had that lab testing done, even though they have significant cardiovascular disease. And then we get those results. And then you move forward and say, okay, well, how are we going to fix all these things? But, you love the advanced blood testing. I do as well. It's sad that a lot of people don't get this. Maybe they don't have access to it, or they don't work with a physician who even offers it to them. But, every lab testing company, in the United States, for sure, you can order an HSCRP and see your inflammatory status.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all those are really good. I would also add in fasting insulin, I think is a really good one to look at. I've seen a lot of people really move that number with things like intermittent fasting, improving their omega-3 ratio, their omega-3 to omega-6 ratio, like you were talking about, getting the omega-3s, getting more exercise in for many people. Fasting insulin, insulin's one of those big things. When insulin's elevated, it's going to drive up inflammation in the body. And so we got to get that under control. So it's kind of a precursor in a sense to all those other inflammatory markers. So I think that's really key. How about any nutrients? Do you look at any specific nutrients, vitamin D levels, anything like that?
Yeah, so we do serum and intracellular testing on all vitamins and minerals. So we do that. One of my favorites is intracellular vitamin K2. So we talked
Mhm.
about the Japanese and their longevity. One of the secrets may be that they consume a lot of the fermented soy food called natto, which is very, very high in vitamin K2. I think that's one of their longevity strategies. The kicker with natto, should anyone choose to do that, is that it has to be organic and again, preferably in glass. So there is one company that actually does that organic in glass. So somebody could choose to do that if they eat soy. I'm not a huge soy person, but again, it may be one of the secrets that to the Japanese. But test your levels and see where your K2 status is at. But I think also, we really got to test for that leaky gut. That's very easy to test for. Simple blood test for that. And then looking at all the different environmental toxins, you can look at dozens of different, pesticides and phthalates and parabens, VOCs. You can check for the plastics. You can look for all these different mold mycotoxins. You can easily test your home for mold and bacteria growth with a simple Swiffer test. So that's why our methodology is that tests don't guess.
Super key. What are some of the benefits of vitamin K2? Why is that so key to test?
So K2 is what keeps the calcium in the bones and out of the arteries. People with high levels of K2, that's exactly what they do. It's good for, it's great for strong bones. And what it does, it leads to the prevention and also the reversal of coronary calcification and plaque and helps to stabilize any plaques that are there. So vitamin K2 is a great antioxidant. It's part of the immune system, and it's something that most people are deficient in for a multitude of reasons. One of which also is that the healthy gut microbiome converts vitamin K1 into K2, but most people don't have a healthy gut microbiome, so therefore they don't make the conversion. But ultimately, you just want to test that level. You can supplement your way, you can diet your way to it. A lot of different strategies there. And you mentioned, the mitochondrial health. So you can look at markers of CoQ10, you can look at the omegas. You can look at some of these cofactors that are very important inside of the mitochondria and the electron transport chain. Things like copper, for example, intracellular copper. Copper is one of the components of cytochrome C oxidase, which is the fourth component of the electron transport chain. There's other, metallic cofactors that are there, including zinc and selenium is important in those regions. So molybdenum, manganese. I mean, these are all, trace minerals that can be tested and optimized. So lots of cool things that we can do from the testing. And of course, there's gut panels that people can do looking at the gut microbiome. And that's the beauty of doing the testing is you test at time zero, then you come up with a new strategy and many different strategies, and then see how you did. And if you are improving, then you know you're on the path to success.
Yeah, it's really good stuff. And so if you're out there, you're dealing with some of these cardiovascular symptoms or you have family history of it, or maybe a family member that's dealing with it, you can reach out to naturalheartdoctor.com. That's Dr. Jack Wolfson's clinic. And you guys work with people all around the world virtually. Is that right?
Yeah, no, we totally do. I mean, listen, for anyone who's on blood pressure drugs, David, one of the big, presentations I do regarding blood pressure drugs, it's really spectacular. So they looked at four different groups of people. And three groups of the people had hypertension, and one group did not. So the three groups with hypertension, it was kind of like this mixture of who's got high blood pressure, are they taking pharmaceuticals or not? The group with the highest risk of cardiovascular events, heart attack, stroke, and dying, were the people with normal blood pressure on blood pressure drugs. They had a higher risk than the people with high blood pressure, no drugs. They had a higher risk than the people with high blood pressure and on drugs. The worst category were the people taking pharmaceuticals and their blood pressure is 120 over 80, and they think that they're safe. Somebody with 120 over 80 on pharmaceuticals thinks that they're in the same situation as Jack Wolfson and David Jockers, and they're not. They're at high risk, and nobody is telling them. That's 2019 Journal of Hypertension, owned and sponsored by the American Heart Association, of all people. And, so if you or someone are on high blood pressure drugs, you better be devising a plan or working with someone to get off of the drugs ASAP.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, all of these pharmaceutical drugs are never meant for long-term solutions. They're meant for very short-term symptom relief, in a sense, right? And then ultimately getting to the root cause and addressing it and getting things back in balance and homeostasis in the body. So you shouldn't just be taking that thinking you're healthy. But that is a really surprising finding. You would think the person that's taking the drugs and still has high blood pressure, you think that they'd have the worst outcomes, but it's actually the people that where the drugs, in a sense, are working, those are the people with the worst outcomes. What is your hypothesis there?
Well, I think what probably happens, my hypothesis is that maybe it's like there are more drugs with more side effects and more problems. That's one thing. The other thing could be is that there could be some intermittent hypotension or like an overshoot where some of these people, occasionally are suffering from lower blood pressure. That's probably the factor there. But I think ultimately it just highlights is that the pharmaceutical industry has one intention to make money. And the more and the faster that people understand that that is their mission, then they'll understand that. So, again, pharmaceutical industry is very good at, a pill for every ill, but they've got nothing when it comes to cures. And that's why I'm so excited to be on with you to kind of
Yeah.
share this message.
Yeah, for sure. So again, you can reach out to Dr. Jack at naturalheartdoctor.com. Last question. What are top 3 to 5 supplements that you and your family take on a regular basis?
Well, we definitely take a lot of binders. We take the humic acid, fulvic
Yeah.
acid, Shilajit type products. We like that. We take organ supplements. We take salmon roe supplements. We also eat those foods, but we're really going towards a food-based strategy first and foremost. We talked about vitamin K2, and one of our favorite sources of that is Australian emu oil. So emu oil is very high in fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, K, including K2 as MK4, which is a really good supplement too for pregnant women because it crosses the placenta. There's some concern about MK7 leading to placental calcification, so that's a potential concern there. But food is medicine. We've known that forever. We can deal with some food-based supplements. In addition, I mean, I definitely think there's a place for products like nitric oxide boosters, which could be amino acids, L-arginine, citrulline, taurine, nitrate type products like organic beetroot powder are very good. There's some, if people are looking to dial in kind of inflammation, oxidative stress, there's some good things for that. Something like berberine, for example, could be useful, for a lot of different people that, maybe they've got advanced disease, maybe they've suffered a heart attack. Instead of taking a statin drug, they can take a natural alternative like berberine. Good gut microbiome enhancing strategies, and that certainly is going to come from food first. But there may be some supplemental, probiotics people could take along with it.
Well, great stuff, Dr. Jack. We talk all day about this. Guys, reach out to him again, naturalheartdoctor.com. Always fun having these conversations, and we'll see you soon, Dr. Jack. Be blessed, everybody.
Thank you for tuning in to Doctor Talks. We hope today's episode has enlightened and inspired you on your path to optimal health. Each day is a new opportunity to make choices that empower your well-being. For more insights and strategies, subscribe to our podcast and visit our website, www.drtalks.com. Stay connected, stay healthy, and join us next time on Doctor Talks. Real talks from real doctors on the issues that matter to you most.